and this is Pen and Reel, where I will take a look at media issues not from the perspective of a fan or consumer, but as a writer and filmmaker. For today's topic, I want to take a look at something that has created a lot of controversy: Disney's Star Wars. Now, what I am not trying to do is discuss Disney's handling of Star Wars. Opinions are all over the place, and so many vocal people hate The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi that any discussion of the merits and demerits of these movies is just opening a can of worms. While my opinion of these movies may come up at certain points during this video and future videos, I really don't want it to be about whether or not I enjoyed them. No, my intention is not to add to the arguments of whether or not they're any good or if they have ruined our childhoods, but to take a step back and look at the entire Disney era from a different perspective, that of a writer and a filmmaker. That's right, I want to talk logistics. While I don't think that any of this will necessarily change how anyone feels, I do hope it at least makes some of you think about things a little differently and maybe understand why things are the way they are. Now, when Lucas sold the Star Wars rights to Disney, I don't recall anyone discussing the fact that Disney might do away with the expanded universe. The only thing I really remember was excitement over the fact that we were getting new Star Wars movies. And that excitement held out until The Force Awakens came out. The main complaints I heard about The Force Awakens, aside from A New Hope retread gripe, was that Disney had ditched the expanded universe and went in a completely different direction. Fan favorite characters, such as Jason Solo and Mara Jade, were no more. There was no Yuuzhan Vong War and Chewie didn't die, which I am sure will make many happy. So much of the good and bad of the expanded universe was gone. It didn't matter anymore. So why did they do this? Did they simply discard what they didn't care for and arbitrarily start from scratch? Well, I think it's a bit more complicated than that. And that's what I want to explore today. To begin, let's consider the expanded universe option for how Disney could have approached Star Wars. They could have kept the expanded universe intact and made adaptations of already existing stories, as well as developing new stories of their own. This is obviously what most people wanted. All of the stories they know and love intact, with more added to it. What could the problem be with that? So many problems. First, what is the cliche about books made into movies? We hear it all the time, and I myself have said it plenty. The book was better than the movie. Almost always, movie adaptations leave out a great deal. Cut things, make unnecessary changes in order to fit the format. No, maybe necessary changes in order to fit the format. Or worse, they make unnecessary changes that ruins the story, and just generally butcher the source material, even if it is done well. So is that what Star Wars fans really want? Inferior copies of books they love? And what's more, adaptations would get boring. Sure, there are plenty of people who haven't read the books, so for them it would all be new. But for fans who have read the books, they'd inevitably get tired of seeing stuff they have already read, even if it is done well. I know I would. And just want new stuff. But how do you do new stuff alongside the adaptations? The expanded universe is vast. There are so many books with such a large continuity that creating new, epic stories would be very difficult within the timeline given. Short of jumping far ahead and creating content well after everything, it would be creatively stifling to be bound to the established continuity while attempting to tell a grand epic. There would be so many things to avoid, so many things you'd have to adhere to, that you'd run the risk of contradicting continuity, or else limiting the effect and outcome of the story you're telling. You want to bring back the Empire? Can't, because that didn't happen. Han gets a cybernetic eye? Nope, didn't happen, so you can't do that. Leia passes away, sending her children to the dark side? You can't kill her off before she dies in the books. Planets have to adhere to the timeline, characters do, so many things have to fit into the continuity that it can be stifling and greatly limit the kind of story you want to tell. Sure, it could be done, but it wouldn't be easy. and it might not be very exciting. And let's face it, Star Wars is epic. It's supposed to be big, crazy stuff on a grand scale, and too many limitations would just drag that down. And let's consider the actors. They have gotten old. It's been over 40 years since A New Hope first came out. This leaves us in a very difficult position. You either recast Luke, Han, Leia, etc., or you use the original actors and set the new movies relative to their age. So let's look at those options. Recasting. Most people simply don't like recasting, particularly when the original actors are still around. There's going to be constant comparisons to the original, and there will be plenty of people who gripe about any recast no matter what. Just look at the Solo movie. There are plenty of people on either side, but regardless of how you feel about... oh man, it's hard to pronounce his name. Alden Ehrenreich, as a young Han Solo, it is difficult to avoid the fact that recasting a beloved character was and is a point of contention. I think that eventually this could be accepted, but there are plenty of fans that would fall on the wayside as a result. Or at the very least, just be hypercritical. As for the option of still using the original actors and filming in the equivalent era, this poses even more troubles. By the time The Force Awakens came out, if you stuck to the timeline of the books relative to our passage of time, we would be deep in the Yuuzhan Vong War. So slide the scale back a bit, say start at Vector Prime, because you don't have to be exact. Then you'd be starting with a Star Wars story that is very different from anything anyone knows of Star Wars, and a widely divisive story to boot. So do we scrap the Yuuzhan Vong War? So do we scrap the Yuuzhan Vong altogether? Or stick with it, regardless of commercial viability? How do we handle aging actors who may not be around too much longer? Rest in peace, Carrie Fisher. When the books go well beyond what they are capable of. So, keeping the expanded universe intact would have been very difficult, particularly from a writer and filmmaker standpoint. And let's face it, Disney wants to make money, as would any company that purchased the rights. So they would be looking at the commercial viability of any such endeavors. The adaptations might do well, given how many people who haven't read the books, but limited flexibility in original storytelling could greatly affect the quality of the work they could produce, which in turn would certainly harm profitability. In the end, I think there would have been people complaining regardless of how Disney handled Star Wars. They wanted to revitalize the franchise, make it new and exciting again, and you can't do that when tied to the past and bound by hundreds of books, comics, and video games that strictly tell you what you can and can't do. They also couldn't keep fans... They also couldn't keep the old fans happy if they were going to try to make it new and exciting again, as would necessitate doing away with elements of what they already knew and loved. Recasting, changing story points, contradicting continuity, whatever they did, there would be people complaining. I don't think there is a scenario where everyone is happy. So what is a little company like Disney to do? Regardless of how you feel about how Disney handled it, I think ignoring the expanded universe to some degree was the wisest decision. Certainly, there would be plenty of people unhappy with it, but as I said, there would be plenty of people who were unhappy no matter what. Could they have kept some parts and scrapped others? Could Episode 7 have taken place 40 years in the future, with all of the previous events taking place, but they started anew where the Yuuzhan Vong War would have been? Perhaps. Perhaps there was some middle ground that could have been far easier to accept for the hardcore Star Wars fanbase. All I really know is, as a writer and a filmmaker, I would have found it incredibly difficult to work strictly within the confines of the EU and still make epic, compelling movies. If I were the one making the movies, there would have had to be compromise. Certain content that had to be ignored in order to make the best movies I possibly could given the resources at my disposal and what was laid before me. So if I'm going to scrap things, why not scrap it all and do something completely different? Like Batman did with The Dark Knight. Or Spider-Man has done several times. And look how good the Marvel Cinematic Universe versions of Star Wars have done, of Spider-Man has done. Or Superman has been rebooted multiple times. Or 21 Jump Street. You know, people accept all of these. There are any number of other franchises that have attempted it with varying success. Just because you can't contradict continuity if you don't have any to begin with. You may not like what Disney has done with Star Wars, or you may love it, or maybe you're somewhere in between. Whatever the case, it's pretty clear to me that there was no solution that wouldn't come with a good deal of backlash. And from a creative and logistical standpoint, especially when you're running a business and have to consider profitability, some sacrifices were inevitable. And that, my friends, is that. Hopefully this helps you look at the entire situation a little bit differently. I'm sure that if you miss the expanded universe, this won't ease the pain of that loss any. But maybe it will help you understand why this kind of decision was made, even if only a little. All that being said, do you disagree? How do you think they could have handled making new movies if they had kept the EU intact? Let me know in the comments if you have any ideas to address some of the issues I brought up. I am curious to see what you think. Until next time, this is Uncle Joel saying, stay tangible.